It brings me zero pleasure to say this, but I have to keep it honest. Dusk Diver 2 is a giant disappointment. For context, I absolutely love the original Dusk Diver and sang its praises as often as I could. What's most disappointing then about Dusk Diver 2 is that it seems like the development team didn't really understand what made the original game good. While there are certainly huge technical and presentational improvements, the core gameplay has taken a step back in nearly every measurable way. Dusk Diver 2 once again places Yang Yumo in the starring role, trying her best to live a normal life in Jimending. Her teammates Leo, Viata, and Behet are also trying to do the same. However, they find themselves in yet another interdimensional adventure. Not only has the alternate realm of Yoshinding greatly expanded, but the group find themselves constantly chased by a mysterious masked diver. There's quite a few mysterious plot threads that will keep you wanting to see what happens next. Aiding this are the vastly improved visuals. At a quick glance, it might look similar to the previous game, but upon closer inspection, the facial animation, character details, and overall quality are noticeably better. The lower thirds and character portraits during dialogue look much more stylized as well. The one addition I would have loved would have been English voiceover, but sadly it's only in Japanese and Chinese once again. Overall, I'd say the story has seen big improvements in nearly every way. I wish I could say the same for the rest of the game. Like its predecessor, Dusk Diver 2 is a mix of city exploration and action beat-em-up gameplay. Jimending and its surrounding areas have been greatly expanded, allowing you to explore many new locations. You'll partake in mostly the same activities like eating food and finding collectibles. However, a number of side activities I enjoyed, like going to the movies and the capsule toy machines, don't make a return here. It's not a huge deal, but those little activities really made the city feel more fleshed out and lived in. What is nice though is that some buildings, mainly the convenience store, don't require load screens. Again, not a big thing, but it's little aspects like this that can really add up. Combat has also been greatly expanded. Instead of just calling in your teammates for one-off attacks, you can now swap between any of them on the fly and control them directly. Leo is a little bit slower but hits harder, Behet attacks faster and can rack up big combo numbers quickly, and La Viata attacks from range with a variety of guns. To me, Behet was probably the most fun character to use as he seemed to have the best balance between speed and power. On the flip side, La Viata was the least fun for me to use because she was a little too slow and didn't quite hit hard enough. And this leads me to my biggest problem with Dusk Diver 2. Enemies take way too long to kill. In the original Dusk Diver, you could beat enemies in a few seconds. Combat felt like it was more about crowd control as there were so many enemies on screen at a time and they all had different attacks you had to keep track of. It was exciting and constantly kept you on your toes. It just had a nice flow to it. In Dusk Diver 2, there's probably a quarter of the enemies per battle and it felt like they took 4 times longer to kill. For a game that's about 80% combat, that's a recipe for boredom. Now, I could just end the review right there, but I'm really only getting started. So, I have a theory. I don't know if this is true, it's just a guess, but what I think the developers were trying to do here was to make it more like a character action game like Devil May Cry. That would make sense, as those types of games also don't typically have a lot of enemies on screen at once. It's more about stringing together big combos in fun, flashy ways. The big problem with Dusk Diver 2 though is that the game doesn't give you a deep enough moveset for it to play like a character action game. You will unlock more moves as you level up, but it's just not enough. You'll find yourself using the same moves over and over until the very end of the game. Instead of being fun, combat quickly turns into a chore. Exacerbating this issue is that the character switching has a cooldown on it, a fairly lengthy one too. It would have been awesome to be able to string together a combo, swap in a different character to keep it going, and then swap back to keep it going even further. Sadly, the game just doesn't play like that. So what you're left with is a game filled with enemies that take forever to kill, a shallow moveset to fight them with, in a game that's about 80% combat. To say the least, it gets dull really fast. Probably the second biggest letdown for me were the dungeon designs. The first dungeon starts out so promising. You find yourself in an arcade-themed dungeon. You'll find coins to unlock certain areas, you'll fight enemies in a giant air hockey arena where you have to dodge pucks, and even play a bit of whack-a-mole. While I felt like this dungeon overstayed its welcome a bit, I loved the idea. It was so clever and I was really excited to see what dungeons came next. Then the rest looked like this. Just boring, soulless, uninteresting hallways. What happened? Did the dev team just give up? Were they pressed for time? Whatever the reason is, it's just sad to see because there was so much potential. As I mentioned earlier, Dusk Diver 2 has seen a nice facelift in the visual department. Character models look better, the city feels more alive, and the production value overall just took a step up. Playing on PlayStation 5, the game runs at a solid 60 frames per second and looks really crisp. The game looks particularly good if you're able to play on an OLED screen. Sadly, it seems like the music is just recycled. I could be wrong and I'm sure there are plenty of new tracks, but it felt like there weren't that many. While the original game had an awesome soundtrack full of rocking tunes, it would have been nice to have more new ones here. Sadly, Dusk Diver 2 is one of the most disappointing sequels I've ever played. No one wanted to sing its praises more than me, as I love the original so much. However, between its dull combat and boring dungeons, I just can't recommend this game. Even though Dusk Diver 2 is a bigger game than the original, probably taking 12 to 15 hours to complete, it doesn't really matter if it's boring. I genuinely don't like being negative, but I also believe in being honest. Save your money for another game, as there are plenty more to come in 2022. Now, if you haven't played the original Dusk Diver, check out my review for it right here. It's an absolutely fantastic game that you can probably get pretty cheap now. And if you found this review helpful, please drop a like, and to stay up to date with all my upcoming reviews, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.